This is the FStech podcast.
Hello, and welcome to this latest FStech podcast. I'm Jonathan Easton, editor of FStech, and today we're going to be looking at the rise of confidential computing in finance. The life of a CISO is a complicated one. Increasingly sophisticated cyber threats from malicious actors are targeting financial institutions more and more, while ever-growing regulatory commitments, including the Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA for short, introduced early this year, are compounding the number of issues which security professionals are having to keep on top of to ensure smooth operations. It's for these reasons, along with many others that we'll discuss today, that top banks and other financial institutions are turning to confidential computing. To put it plainly, confidential computing refers to the use of advanced technology and security measures to protect sensitive financial data and computations from unauthorised access or exposure, even when it's being processed or analysed in external or third-party environments. It's emerging as a critical component of modernising financial services while safeguarding sensitive data, enabling efficient collaboration, and complying with stringent regulations. And it helps financial institutions strike a balance between innovation and security in an increasingly interconnected and data-driven industry. Joining me now to discuss what this all means for financial services and what FIs can do to adopt this kind of approach to security is Dr. Richard Searle, Vice President of Confidential Computing at Fortanix. Thanks for being here today, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Just to kick us off, can you explain, from a kind of a top level, what confidential computing is and how it differs from traditional security measures in the financial sector?
Yeah, certainly. Confidential computing is a term that people may have seen used in relation to data security, and it can be applied within different contexts. But one of the things that I am involved with is something called the Confidential Computing Consortium at the Linux Foundation, and that's an industry forum that was set up in 2019 to promote and develop this technology, and they've provided a very coherent definition. And what confidential computing does is it protects data when it's being used within hardware with the property of attestation in order to verify that the security is in place. And essentially what's going on is that there are three phases of data. We're familiar with protecting data at rest, where we encrypt it. We're familiar with secure communications, where data's in transit. But when data is in use, actually being processed by the underlying compute resource, the data, whether it was encrypted or not, has to be within plain text for that processor to make sense of it. And that makes it vulnerable. And what confidential computing does is it then assigns a region of memory that we call a trusted execution environment, which is encrypted and protects that information while the application is being executed. And that prevents any external access to, for example, root administrators, the host operating system, or any potential network threats that are undetected and trying to access information on the machine.
So really, it's kind of an evolution of existing and kind of new way of looking at security in finance. One area I mentioned in the introduction was DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which in its description it says it aims to ensure the operational resilience of the financial sector in the EU. How does confidential computing align with those objectives?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, in your introductory remarks, you mentioned, the level of cyber threats that have to be faced by financial institutions nowadays. And we've seen, for example, attacks by nation-state actors attributed to North Korea on the SWIFT transactions network. And what confidential computing can provide in the financial services context is several key benefits, particularly in respect to the DORA regulations. Essentially, what it's able to do is to protect important applications in order to provide resilience against those threats. As I mentioned, the isolation guarantees provided effectively enable applications to be secure within your infrastructure, even when a cyber threat actor is present. it also enables you to provide a level of resilience through that isolation by connecting secure applications together in isolation from other applications contexts that may have a lower level of security. And that can prove important in terms of business continuity where you're suffering from a cyber threat. And the other key point is that the attestation property I mentioned that provides verification of confidential computing security is very important from a risk management and compliance perspective to demonstrate that data has been used securely and that systems are running with appropriate protections in order to sustain the operations of the institution concerned. So all contributory benefits from this technology.
And you mentioned collaboration there, data collaboration. And given this wider collaborative nature of the financial industry, how can confidential computing facilitate secure data sharing and collaboration among institutions while still ensuring data integrity and confidentiality, do you think?
Well, this is another important point, and I like the use of the term data collaboration, which it tends to be how we refer to things at Fortanix, as opposed to the other term of data sharing that people may be thinking about in the context of multi-party applications or even intra-organizational collaborations, between different departments within a financial institution. So confidential computing offers the ability, because of the protection afforded to data when it's in use, to deploy applications that can process data securely without the need to expose that data to any third party. And so examples of where this has been used in practice, and we've published some academic work on this at the IEEE Big Data conference last year, is anti-money laundering, where shared intelligence between independent financial institutions can lead to enhanced models to detect money laundering activity and then to intercept and quarantine those funds. The other example is where regulators might want to be able to be provided with oversight of applications deployment, such as anti-money laundering, and they can be provided with that access in order to verify the integrity of models that are being used for different processes, and also that the data being used has been handled securely. So again, important features that are necessary where you want to collaborate on data for different applications, and particularly, we see this as an important future trend where collaborative AI systems are being developed due to the necessary volumes of training data required.
You mentioned that buzzword AI, and it's something we talked about, slightly just before hitting record. Is that something you see as playing a big role in confidential computing going forward as well?
Yes, I do, and we're seeing regulations being drafted, such as the US AI Bill of Rights proposal, also the EU AI Act, which is heading towards ratification. And what's important about these issues is that they require oversight of how data is being used and processed, both for training for models and also the models themselves. And equally, the intellectual property that's contained within those artificial intelligence applications in terms of parameter sets, that's the weights and biases for models, it's very important that they're protected, because any interference with those systems could have dire consequences downstream in terms of their application within operations. So confidential computing is going to play an important role here. Within the industry, we see this as a sort of co-development of AI systems alongside data privacy and data security systems, and I think they're going to be important to the successful implementation and the secure implementation of AI systems within the financial community and in other industries too.
So one example that I've seen from Fortanix in regards to kind of bringing all this together in a practical sense was a work that you guys did with Goldman Sachs to migrate its Hadoop data lakes. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Hadoop data lakes to Amazon S3, and expanding its global platform to help the bank better serve its European customers. Can you give us a top level view of this case and how confidential computing's helped Goldman to be more secure and better prepared to deal with these regulatory changes that we've discussed?
Sure. Well, Goldman Sachs is obviously a very highly recognized and important name within the financial services sector, and we're very pleased to be working with them, and delighted and grateful that they've been able to allow us to publish the case study that we recently released. And what was important for Goldman as a customer was that they wanted to be able to consolidate fairly scattered backups for these data lakes, and to put them into an Amazon S3 environment. And in order to do that, they needed to ensure that sufficient security was in place for both their internal and external compliance requirements. And to do that, they used the Fortanix Data Security Manager product, which provides full HSM as a service cryptographic support for enterprises, and it also provides very strict policy implementations in terms of key ownership, key control, and separation of duties between different key owners. And what this has enabled Goldman Sachs to do is to not only undertake this migration project successfully with sufficient security, but also to enable access to data under various permission controls to clients within different territories, where they're also protecting the data that under the jurisdictional requirements of those territories that may not be their domestic US market. So very important for things like EU general data protection regulations compliance, and also various financial regulatory requirements within, for example, Switzerland under FINMA, and an important insight into how confidential computing can be used to provide data security, not only at the operational level where data is processed, which we've talked about earlier, but also in terms of cryptographic key security and future post-quantum cryptography support.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting case study, and I'd recommend our readers go away and have a look at it. And certainly, it gives you an idea of some of those best practices around this kind of transformation. That even if you're not kind of doing a one for one in the same of what Goldman have achieved, lots of lessons to be learned. Would you agree with that?
Yes, certainly. I think it's important from a knowledge sharing perspective that best practices are, communicated. We tried to do that with some of our academic paper publications, and also, that people gain an insight into how technologies can support requirements that they might otherwise have believed, very difficult to implement with existing systems. So, yeah, it's an important case study, both for Fortanix and I think for the industry more widely in terms of the use of this technology, under a very strict compliance environment.
So we've mentioned one aspect of kind of future technology, or a technology that we're it's in play today, but it's becoming a more pronounced thing in that case study, and previously talking about AI. But what trends do you foresee looking forward in the integration of confidential computing within the financial sector, especially in response to this evolving regulatory landscape with frameworks such as DORA?
Yeah, certainly. Well, as we discussed, prior to the podcast, I think AI is going to become ubiquitous, and there's, obviously an active and ongoing debate as to how that takes place, and data security is going to be intrinsic to that. But there are also other areas that are very relevant here. So something that we are working on, fairly extensively at Fortanix with partners is tokenization of assets and the exchange of tokens under secure frameworks to prevent access by the custodian, which has been the Achilles heel really of blockchain implementations. Confidential computing supports that, including the verifiability of the applications used for those exchanges. And that's going to be important as we transition to an era of things like central bank digital currencies, and that's on the horizon. And I think this is going to be another active area for confidential computing deployment, certainly for Fortanix. I think equally, we see the future with decentralization, where the management of keys in order to protect assets and tokens that might represent some financial instrument are going to be important, not only for institutions, but also for their end customers. And so confidential computing is going to be important to the establishment of decentralized networks between institutions, and also as access points for customers at the edge, particularly where, for example, AI applications might be deployed locally to help people optimize their use of financial services. So there's a lot of exciting areas of development. We work at Fortanix to keep abreast of trends across a variety of different industries. Wherever data is being used, it needs to be secured, and it often needs to be private and confidential. And I see this technology as being fundamental to that, because it's now available through all of the major processor manufacturers. And we provide support for those different hardware implementations to support our customers' requirements, whether that's in their data centers or as part of their cloud strategy.
It's interesting you mentioned CBDCs there. That's an area as well which is kind of going off in a million different directions, with different countries taking different approaches. So it's interesting, at the time of recording a few days ago in India, they announced, the Reserve Bank of India announced plans to implement a wholesale CBDC kind of scheme for the cool money market. And that's not something I'd ever really considered before. And so do you think that confidential computing kind of, as things like digital currencies potentially go off in different directions, which maybe weren't foreseen by some people, confidential computing, do you think you're confident in its ability to handle these different use cases?
Well, I think that remains to be seen, and the proof is going to be in some of the validation projects and pilots that are already underway. And I think what we now have is a grounding within the industry of the use of this technology for implementations like anti-money laundering deployments, like federated machine learning within distributed architectures, the sorts of architectures that will be necessary to support digital central bank digital currency projects and decentralization. I think what's going to be interesting to see as things move forward is how the technology can provide the levels of resilience, coming back to the topic of the DORA regulations, in respect of very sophisticated attacks by nation state actors like, for example, the North Korean example that we've already spoken about this morning. So I think it's going to be interesting to see in the architectural design how security is baked in from the beginning. And I think that is the message I would give to industry, is that security really needs to be front and center of considerations about how these decentralized networks, tokenization systems, and wider AI and data collaboration projects are undertaken.
So on that note, I think that's a really great way to round out this discussion, bringing us back to DORA and ultimately providing our listeners with a key insight on confidential computing that they can take forward into their future decision making. Many thanks to my guest, Dr. Richard Searle, Vice President of Confidential Computing at Fortanix, and to you for listening. For FStech, I'm Jonathan Easton, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the FStech podcast.